A cracked terracotta flower pot sat on the sill of Elias Martel's top-floor studio, its shards glued back into place with amber varnish left over from one of his canvases. Through the gap in the window he could smell the river that ringed the old mill district, a brackish ribbon sliding past warehouses whose bricks were the color of dried blood. The city below lay groggy under late summer heat. Yet Elias felt cold. He dipped a palette knife into the glass jar standing beside the flower pot, an unmarked jar filled with something that looked like cinnamon and smelled like iron-rich mud, and began scraping it into a puddle of linseed oil. The soil came from a shallow depression behind a row of shotgun houses on Polk Street. He had scooped it up at dawn, kneeling beside the yellow perimeter tape before the crime scene unit arrived. A double homicide, the news said. A pawn shop owner and his daughter. Elias tried not to think about the bullet holes or the chalk outlines. He tried to think only about hues, because this earth was different. Under his studio skylight it broke into flecks of crimson, rust, and volcanic violet colors he had never coaxed from store-bought pigments. Soon the mixture turned a rich, opaque maroon. He loaded a hog bristle brush and, without sketch or plan, made the first stroke across a fresh canvas. The line curved downward like a closing eyelid. The next stroke cut across it, a stroke so violent the bristles squealed. Before he realized it, something emerged, an arm, slender and limp, reaching toward the viewer. A cascade of dark hair. A single patent leather shoe glinting in a pool of water. Elias's heart thudded. He touched the still wet limb with a fingertip as if verifying the woman wasn't real. Then he pressed on, lured by the undertow of inspiration that came only when he painted with this criminal earth. He worked 6 hours without stopping, until the studio smelled less of turpentine than of river mud and copper. At last he stepped back. A woman in a mauve cocktail dress lay face down in a city fountain. A woman in a mauve cocktail dress lay face down in a city fountain. Water lilies bobbed around her head like a parody of a funeral wreath. Behind the fountain stood a bronze equestrian statue, General Corte, city hero, its base smeared with graffiti. The brushwork was raw, but the image rang with the awful clarity of a thunderclap. Elias's throat tightened. He recognized that fountain. It stood in Corte Plaza, 3 blocks from the courthouse. He visited it once a week to sketch pigeons and shoeshiner, but the woman, she wasn't anyone he knew. Not yet. He scrubbed his hands, stained to the wrist with blood-colored clay, then pulled the sheet over the painting. The day's light had turned saffron. Evening newspapers slapped against stoops outside. He switched on the radio, needing noise. A talk show host droned about rising homicide statistics and the mayoral race. Elias shut it off. He remembered the other canvases stacked behind the folding screen. A convenience store clerk sprawled against a freezer. A taxi veering off a bridge. A child's bike crushed beneath a delivery truck. Each scene had spilled from him after he ground police tape soil with oil, and each had come to pass, days or weeks later, in dreadful fidelity to the brushstrokes. He told himself it was coincidence, intuition, the city's violent undercurrent speaking through pigment, but coincidence had limits. Last month he had painted a dock worker swallowed by a grain auger. 3 nights later the emergency bulletin pinged his phone, and the photograph on the news site could have been a still from his canvas. He had sworn he would stop. Now here he stood, with another prophecy drying behind him. A knock rattled the studio door. Elias flinched, half expecting a detective in a wool suit. Instead, the visitor was smaller, his landlord's boy, Milo, clutching an envelope. "Ma says rent's the first," Milo announced. Elias nodded, fumbling for his wallet. The boy's eyes roamed past him to the draped canvas. "That one new?" "A sketch," Elias muttered. He handed over crumpled bills. Milo lingered. "Police downstairs an hour ago," he said. "They asked if you seen anything on Polk." Elias kept his face still. "I was here all morning." The boy shrugged. "Ma says artists see things regular folk don't." He left, sneakers squeaking down the hallway. Elias slid the bolt, exhaling. How long before the police saw the pattern? They'd find his footprints behind every yellow tape, rescue his fingerprints from shards of bottle glass he used to scoop dirt. They'd examine his paintings, if any buyer admitted owning them, because the pictures sold fast, unsettling collectors into paying absurd sums. A gallerist once called his work post-mortem expressionism. She meant it as praise. He considered destroying the new canvas, but he never did. Destruction felt like lying, like concealing a crime, and what if the act of painting didn't foresee the murders but caused them? If he burned the canvas, would the woman in Corte Plaza be spared, or simply die invisibly? Logic offered no foothold. He phoned the gallery. "No, Lorna," he said when she answered. "This one's not for sale." She sighed theatrically. "The waiting list is 15 names." "Not this one." He hung up and stared at the shrouded prophecy until the studio blurred. Eventually, fatigue drove him to the iron bed in the corner. He dreamed of lily pads turning to pennies and a face rising through water, mouth open in a silent question. Morning arrived with sirens. Elias jerked awake. Sunlight bisected the floorboards. A helicopter's chop trembled the window glass. He dashed to the radio, but the broadcast was music. He opened the window. Police cruisers wailed somewhere south near the river. Not Corte Plaza. He dressed, grabbed his sketchbook, and forced himself onto the street. Humidity slapped him like a wet rag. News vans idled outside the precinct 2 blocks away, their satellite dishes tilted at the sky. A reporter spoke into camera. Double homicide on Polk Street, now linked to a series of ritualistic killings. He hurried past, heart hammering. Distract yourself, he told himself. Think of color temperature, of chiaroscuro. But every sidewalk crack looked like a fissure in fate. At the cafe near Corte Plaza, he ordered coffee and claimed a table facing the fountain. Tuesday foot traffic poured around the monument. Lawyers in navy suits, bike messengers, children on a field trip. Tourists snapped photos of the bronze general. In the fountain basin, lilies floated peacefully. No woman in mauve. An hour passed, then 2. Elias sketched the statue's horse. Noonlight bleached the page. Still no tragedy. Maybe. He dared hope. Painting the scene had altered events, warning some unknown victim away. Then, at 12:47 p.m., the air cracked. A gunshot. Pigeons exploded skyward. People screamed and scattered. Elias shot to his feet. Near the fountain, a man in cargo shorts staggered, clutching his shoulder. Security guards sprinted. Somewhere else, another pop sounded. The shriek of feedback blared from a bullhorn. The school group's teacher herding children. But no one lay in the water. Elias braced himself against the cafe railing. Ambulances arrived. Reporters converged. Within minutes, the plaza brimmed with uniforms. He waited, trembling, until the injured were loaded into vans. 2 wounded, no dead. The paramedics' blue gloves shone like wet petals. He stumbled home, confused relief swamping him. He hadn't painted this shooting. Maybe it proved the future was malleable. Maybe the terror in his dreams could be redirected, diffused into smaller evils. He unlocked his studio. The odor of drying oil engulfed him. Hands shaking, he lifted the drape from the canvas. The picture had changed. Where the woman once floated face down, a man kneeled on the fountain's rim, pointing a revolver into the crowd. The kneeling posture matched the footage he'd just witnessed on a cafe television replay. The mauve-dressed woman was gone. Instead, at the painting's edge, near a trash can, her slender silhouette walked away, her back turned. The lilies remained, but they clustered at the fountain's far side, as though drifting from turbulence. Elias recoiled. The paint was dry to the touch, yet the composition had altered. He checked his phone. Breaking news about the plaza shooting. The suspect, a disgruntled parking garage attendant, was in custody. No fatalities. Photographs showed him beside the same equestrian statue, featured in Elias's canvas, though in reality a police officer, not a woman, stood near the trash can. Elias could not stand. He sank onto the crate of empty turpentine bottles. For a vertiginous second he imagined the painting as a window, its view adjusting to whatever chain of events his pigment summoned. Had his act of painting unlocked something, or someone, that revised reality by redrafting his visions? He searched the jar of Polk Street earth, as though answers lay in granules. The sun set, neon buzzed to life outside. He realized he was sitting in darkness, the canvas glowing faintly under a city light halo. He rose, found the old slide projector he used for lectures, and shined its white cone across the painting, studying brush ridges, glazing, edges. No tampering. Every new element had identical texture to the original. The paint had not been overlaid. It had transformed at the molecular level. He found no one who would believe him. Instead, he opened his journal and wrote a resolution. I will paint no more with grave earth. He placed the pocket notebook on the windowsill, as though signing a treaty with forces that monitored him. 3 days passed. He bought tubes of cadmium, ultramarine, and earth tone sets from legitimate art stores. With them, he painted abstract landscapes. Safe, indifferent, mute. Buyers remained enthusiastic, but each evening he found himself staring at the jar of dirt. It seemed to vibrate in his peripheral vision. Once, convinced he heard whispering, he flung it out the window, scattering the maroon dust into the alley. Next morning the jar was on the sill again, sealed. On the 4th night he dreamed of a basement lit by naked bulbs and a red-hammed detective bending over a table strewn with photographs, his photographs. She looked up and said, "If you can see them, you can save them." He woke, heart racing. The jar waited on the sill. He fought the compulsion until dawn, then surrendered. Soil poured into the mortar dish, linseed hissed. The color that emerged was deeper than before, like midnight in a wound. This time he prepared 2 canvases, one large, one small. On the first he painted rapidly, a park bench under sycamores, a jogger collapsed, a syringe stuck in her thigh. On the second, smaller one, he painted the same bench but empty, leaves drifting peacefully. When he finished, the sky outside gleamed pewter. He hid the larger painting under plywood boards and hung the smaller one on the display wall, still wet. Let reality choose, he thought. 2 potential outcomes. Overdose or no overdose. If the principle held, the images would resolve into one. At noon he checked the smaller canvas. It had changed. The bench now cradled the jogger, but a paramedic crouched beside her, defibrillator ready. She was pale, yet breathing. The syringe lay broken nearby. The larger hidden painting, when he slid the boards, displayed the same rescue scene. They had merged into a single narrative, death averted. For the first time since Polk Street, Ilias felt something like grace. He sought out the park riverside greenbelt armed with a thermos and sketchbook. Sycamores shimmered in the afternoon breeze. An athletic woman ran loops around the path. Ilias watched her, recognition tightening his chest, the same copper ponytail, the neon shoes. He lingered until she finished her circuit, guzzled water, and left by rideshare, unharmed. Success. Intervention. His paintings were not Cassandra curses. They could be warnings. Relief bloomed inside him like morning light, but the jar was not finished with him. Each new painting arrived in feverish waves. A warehouse fire, a school bus crash, a shoplifting confrontation gone lethal. He painted both doom and reprieve, stacking paired canvases like tarot cards. Sometimes tragedy remained, sometimes mercy prevailed. He could not predict which variables swayed outcome. Exhaustion gnawed his nerves. Nights blurred into ochre streaks. One rainy evening, the red-haired detective from his dream materialized for real. She knocked, flashed a badge. "Detective Mara Kell, we've traced your presence to multiple crime scenes," she said calmly, accepting the mug of coffee he offered. Witnesses recall an artist gathering dirt. Ilias felt the room tilt. "For pigment," he said, "earth pigments, like the old masters." She studied the canvases lining the walls. Sunsets, forests, innocuous works. "May I look behind the partition?" Her tone was gentle, but inarguable. He stepped aside. She sifted through stacks, expression unreadable, until she uncovered the park bench sequence. "These dates," she pointed to the penciled titles. "You painted a woman overdosing before it happened." "It never happened," he said. "She was saved." Detective Kell cocked her head. "How could you know? The incident wasn't publicized. Only EMS and I responded. An anonymous tip led us." Ilias inhaled. "Doesn't that confirm it? Someone tipped you because He stopped, madness perched on his tongue. Kel placed the canvas aside. I'm not here to arrest you. I'm trying to understand why your art predicts violence. Do you stage these scenes? Inspire copycats? No, he whispered. She regarded the jar on the sill, lid off. She approached, dipped a finger. Clay? Smells metallic. She rubbed it between thumb and forefinger. This came from Polk Street, didn't it? He nodded. Her gaze softened. Mr. Martell, someone is using you, or something is. Help me stop them. He laughed raggedly. I've tried. I paint alternatives hoping to twist the path, but the images mutate. Then let's test it, she said. Paint what you see tonight. We'll act before it's too late. Lightning flashed beyond the window, thunder followed like God slamming a door. Elias hesitated, then set a fresh canvas on the easel. He scooped soil into oil. Detective Kell stood at his shoulder, recorder active. The storm outside ratcheted in intensity as he began. Shapes emerged quickly. A narrow kitchen, linoleum peeling. A young man holding a cleaver. Across from him, an older man, his father, backs against a fridge, hands raised. The younger man's jaw was clenched in anguish rather than rage. A pot on the stove boiled over. Elias's brush stilled. The scene felt intimate, preventable. He whispered, domestic argument turned fatal. Kell studied the dripping figure. Address? None. I only paint what I see. She snapped photos of the canvas, then phoned dispatch. Check pending domestic calls featuring 2 males, father and adult son, possible knives. She listened, nodded, and said, send units. She ended the call. Nothing yet, but we'll monitor. Hours crawled, rain drummed, Elias brewed coffee. They spoke little. It felt sacrilegious to chat near prophetic art. At 2:41 a.m. Kell's radio crackled. A neighbor had phoned about shouting at 28 Hazelhurst Avenue, father/son, weapons unknown. Kell thanked dispatch and grabbed her coat. Stay here, she told him. No, he said. If I'm part of this mechanism, maybe my presence matters. She weighed arguments, procedure versus intuition. Finally, she nodded. Don't leave my side. They sped through slick streets. Hazelhurst was a cul-de-sac of post-war cottages. Patrol cars flanked House 28. Inside, officers herded a trembling young man from the doorway. His hands were empty. Paramedics attended a middle-aged man seated on a chair, blood seeping through a towel around his bicep. A chef's knife lay on the tile. Superficial cut, an EMT said. Looks worse than it is. Detective Kell exhaled. She turned to Elias. Your painting showed far graver harm. Elias slipped past, heart pounding. The kitchen matched his canvas, minus one element. The boiling pot was now off the flame, lid secured. In the painting, steam had obscured the son's face, rage incarnate. Here the son sobbed, repeating, I almost did it. I almost did it. While officers patted him down, Elias felt gravity shift again. He had painted one future, another had occurred. Maybe his involvement had diffused outcome, or maybe the detectives. Back outside, rain had ceased. Kell leaned against the cruiser, wiping water from her brow, though no drops remained. You saved a life tonight, she said. Elias shook his head. We saved it, but I fear the ledger isn't balanced. Every spared victim pushes the darkness elsewhere. Kell studied him. Show me all your paintings. We'll create a task force. Prevention, not reaction. Her certainty steadied him like a hand on his shoulder. He agreed. They spent the next week cataloging. The mayor approved covert funding. Analysts cross-referenced brush-tip details with neighborhood grids. Elias painted nightly. Kell deployed resources. They prevented a gas station robbery, intercepted a brake failure disaster on Highway 9, rescued a teenager from an overdose. Word never reached press. The city's crime rate dipped 2%, statistically invisible yet felt on back streets and in emergency rooms, but foretold violence multiplied. Canvases filled the studio, nightmares tormented Elias. Each prevention generated 2 new threats. One midnight he painted a bridge collapse, girders twisting like ribs. He called Kell in panic. She scrambled, inspectors, shut the bridge. Next day, engineers declared it sound. Traffic resumed. That night, the bridge collapsed for real during a freight convoy. 12 dead. Kel visited the morgue afterward. "I had every assurance," she rasped. Elias stared at the ruined bridge on canvas, unchanged. He realized then that intervention could postpone horror, but not erase it. The city wasn't a chessboard, it was a hydra. Cut one head, another grew. "Maybe the soil isn't neutral," he told her. "Maybe it thirsts." She met his gaze. "Then destroy it." He opened the kiln he sometimes used to fire ceramic panels. Together they emptied the jar into a crucible and placed it inside, raising temperature until the coils screamed orange. The air stank of burnt iron, sparks popped like knuckles. When they opened the kiln hours later, the soil had vitrified into a black, glassy clinker. Unusable. Elias slept dreamlessly for the first time in months. Morning sunlight woke him. He rose, stretched. No dread. He brewed coffee, wandered to the easel. A blank canvas waited. He squeezed mundane colors and painted an apple, its skin catching the window's glint. He smiled. A knock. Detective Kel, eyes rimmed red. She held her phone toward him. This came at 5 a.m. A photo displayed a mural on an underpass. The bridge collapse, rendered in charcoal linework identical to his, yet he hadn't drawn it. Beneath, a signature. E.M. His initials. "They're framing you," she said. Elias's coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering. In the spill, the liquid shimmered maroon. Behind Kel, down the hallway, muddy footprints led to his door. Fresh, unbroken, coming from nowhere. He followed them with his eyes to the flower pot on the sill. Its repaired seams glowed. Inside, powder lay heaped like red sugar. The jar was gone, yet the soil remained, reborn. Elias understood at last. The earth did not need to be collected. It would come to him. Through cracks, through clay vessels, through dreams. As long as violence existed in the city, the pigment of its anticipation would seep into his life. He was no oracle, he was a conduit. Attempts at suppression merely diversified its avenues. He looked at Kel. "I can't stop painting," he said quietly. "But maybe I can choose what to paint." She glanced at the apple on the easel, then at the crimson liquid on the floor. "Choose hope," she whispered. Elias nodded, though both knew hope alone could not outpace the darkness. Still, he lifted a brush, dipped it into ordinary cadmium red, and began sketching the outline of two people standing side by side, partners, against a backdrop of shifting shadows, halting them for a moment, in a frame where no one was yet dead.